Have you ever stopped to think about what's really holding you up? I mean, deep down in your lower back, there are these 5 incredible bones that carry the weight of pretty much your entire upper body. Today, we're going to dive in and unlock the secrets of these absolute powerhouses, the lumbar vertebrae.
So what's their main job? Well, it sounds simple, but it is absolutely massive. These 5 bones are the primary weight bearers for your whole upper body. Seriously, think of them like the huge, powerful pillars that support everything above your hips.
Right, so there are 5 of them in total, and we label them L1 down through L5. But here's the catch. They're not all created equal. The first 4, so L1 through L4, are what we call typical. They kind of share the same basic blueprint. But that last one, L5, he's the atypical one, the odd one out. And it has some really special features we need to talk about.
Okay, so to really appreciate what makes L5 so unique, we first have to understand the standard model, right? Let's deconstruct a typical lumbar vertebrae and see what L1 through L4 are all about. It all kicks off with the vertebral body. This is the huge, kidney-shaped chunk of bone right at the front. And here is just a perfect example of smart design in nature. Just like a skyscraper needs a wider base, these vertebral bodies get bigger and bigger as you go down from L1 to L5. It makes perfect sense. It's designed to handle more and more weight from above.
Now, stretching out from the back of the body is the vertebral arch. First, you've got these short, beefy pillars called the pedicles. And then you have these broad, flat plates called the lamina that meet in the middle. Put them together, and they form this protective, bony ring that basically acts as a bodyguard for the super delicate spinal cord.
Sticking straight out the back is the spinous process. Now, in the lumbar area, it's not pointy like in other parts of the spine. Nope. It's this thick, kind of rectangular, almost club-shaped plate. And if you run your hand down the center of your own lower back, those are the bumps you're feeling. That's them.
And then shooting out to the sides, you have the transverse processes, these thin, wing-like pieces of bone. And get this, here's a really cool little fact for you. These are basically the lumbar spine's version of ribs. They even follow a neat little pattern. They get longer from L1 down to L3, and then they start to shorten up again.
So how do these vertebrae all link up and move together? Through something called the articular processes. The top parts, the superior facets, are concave, kind of like a bowl. And the bottom ones are convex, so they lock together perfectly, almost like puzzle pieces. This design is just genius. It's why you can bend forward and backwards so easily, but it's also why you can't really twist your lower back much. It's built for stability.
All right, we've got our standard model down. So now, let's meet the specialist of the group, L5. This vertebra is totally unique. It's been specially designed for its supercritical job of connecting our flexible spine to the big, rigid structure of the pelvis. And this chart just lays out the differences so clearly. First, look at the body of L5. It's not just the biggest, it's actually wedge-shaped, taller in the front than in the back. Its transverse processes aren't thin and tapering, they're thick and stout, almost like little pyramids. And its spinous process, much smaller and more rounded, designed to fit into a really tight spot. And you know that wedge-shaped body we just mentioned? That is the key feature. Its unique geometry is pretty much single-handedly responsible for creating what's called the lumbosacral angle, that sharp 120-degree curve where your lower back meets your sacrum. This angle is a critical reason we can stand upright and walk on 2 feet.
Okay, and here's a really specific detail, but it's a dead giveaway. Remember how in a typical vertebra, the upper joints are wider apart than the lower ones? Well, L5 totally flips the script. The distance between its lower joints is the same as, or even wider than the distance between its upper joints. This is a classic telltale sign for identifying L5.
Now, speaking of identification, all these subtle differences can be a real pain to remember, but there's this brilliantly simple trick called Fawcett's rule that lets you name any lumbar vertebra just by looking at it from the back. It's awesome.
It really is as simple as it looks. You just look at the bone from behind, and you mentally connect the 4 dots made by those articular processes, the 2 up top and the 2 at the bottom. The shape that your imaginary lines draw tells you exactly which vertebra you're holding. So let's start at the top. For L1 and L2, the upper joints are way wider than the lower ones. So when you connect those dots, you get a really clear trapezium shape.
As you move down to L3, the spacing between the upper and lower joints starts to even out a little bit, and that transforms the shape into a pretty distinct vertical rectangle. By the time you get down to L4, the spacing is just right. You connect those 4 points, and what you get is a nearly perfect square. See? Simple.
And finally, our special L5. Because of that unique flip we talked about, where the lower processes are as wide or wider than the upper ones, the shape becomes a horizontal rectangle. It's just an incredibly clever and easy way to remember them all. Okay, so we've gone through a ton of intricate detail, but why do we even need to know all this? Well, because this anatomy isn't just for textbooks. It has direct, real-world consequences for our health. Let's look at that clinical connection.
You know, one of the most common problems people have with their lower back is a disc prolapse, what most people call a slip disc. This is when that soft, jelly-like center of the disc that sits between the vertebral bodies pushes out and starts pressing on a nerve. Ouch! Understanding the structure of the vertebrae is absolutely key to figuring out why this happens and how to treat it.
And here's another critical application for you. Doctors often need to get a sample of spinal fluid to diagnose illnesses. It's a procedure called a lumbar puncture. But how do they stick a needle into the spine without risking, catastrophic damage to the spinal cord? Well, the answer is right there in the anatomy we've been covering. First, doctors find a very specific spot. Why? Because the spinal cord itself actually ends pretty high up around the L1 or L2 vertebra. This creates a safe zone lower down. So they insert the needle between L3 and L4 or L4 and L5, and it passes safely through the ligaments. This lets them collect that vital fluid without ever getting close to the spinal cord itself. It's a life-saving procedure that relies completely on knowing this precise anatomical map.
So, as we wrap things up, it really leaves you with this one final thought. The lumbar vertebrae are just a masterclass in biological design. They're constantly performing this incredible balancing act. On one hand, they have to be massive and strong enough to support our entire body. But on the other, they have to be articulated just right to give us the flexibility to bend and move. It's this lifelong tension, this constant dance between strength and mobility engineered right into our bones.